get ready to take control of your healthcare. Here's your host, Ray Cober.
And we're live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Broken Healthcare. My name is Ray Cober. I am your host, and I am delighted to have with us today Dr. Ken Yale. Welcome, Dr. Yale.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks.
Oh, super excited to have you. You know, we've had a few conversations, and a lot has transpired in the world, particularly in Washington, D.C., since we last spoke. And I would love your take on what's going on in D.C. right now. Being kind of a Washington insider, having worked, in the political arena, in the White House, I believe. What is the vibe down there right now?
It is either totally excited or totally depressed, depending on where you're coming from. And just a lot going on, especially in healthcare, and anticipating what is going to happen next, right?
Yeah.
And I have been talking to people from all corners of the planet about this. No surprise, I know people from every corner of the political spectrum, and I am fascinated by how surprised people are, shocked people are, elated people are, excited people are. And to me, it's like, it's another turnover of administration and an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to, because, on our political spectrum, we have all different kinds of folks. And you go too far one way and we course correct in this country, and we go to the middle, and then we go too far the other way, and then we course correct, and we slowly it's kind of like finally get to where we need to be, right? Because we need everybody and all sides, the creative people, the conservative people, all the people kind of working together towards the good, right? Towards something better.
Yeah. Yeah. And, curious. So we're not a political show, and there is a crazy amount of overlap, though, in politics and healthcare. And I tend to be someone that doesn't really, I don't really care for identifying with this party or that party. My mindset is we really need to get to common sense and think about the best candidate for the job, regardless of what that job is. And I know that we're at a crazy time in American history, at least in our lifetimes. I can't remember it ever being as divided, and as there's a lot of vitriol, and people seem to be very kind of cut and dry, black and white. And I just wonder what the sentiment is in D.C. If you think about the change, so just from an outsider's perspective, and I'll share with the audience, I've kind of, I've voted Republican, I've voted Democrat, I've voted Republican. I'm not a guy that is just like a hardliner, just about kind of picking a party and, that's the pony that I'm going to ride. What I like about what I'm seeing is it seems to be, from the outside looking in, an amazing opportunity for a shakeup in government and in healthcare. And I think I don't know if we're ready for it, but I think that is what I'm excited about, is I believe that we are in a place where our politicians are complicit. I think that, if you look at the terms of, senators and congressmen, it seems to me that they're very comfortable, or at least that's, my perspective. And there seems to be a lot of, inside pool deals being made at the expense of the American people. And I think it's gone on for way too long. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but being an insider, am I right to think that are there deals that are being made by our political leaders for, they're a part of a certain pack, or they're running kind of together, and they're making decisions based on their constituents, and maybe for their own selfish devices, and turning a blind eye to what's really best for the American people, because that really is kind of what I feel. I feel like we're being sold down the river. And I don't know if you care to pontificate on that, and I certainly don't mean to put you on the spot, but as someone who's an insider, who's in DC and in healthcare, I'd love to hear what you think.
So I would totally agree with what you said, and I would put it in a little bit of a different framing, and that is, and I think somebody once said that laws never die,
Yeah.
and they just put in place structurally things that seemed a good idea at one point in time, but may not work today, right? And so, if you think about it, the healthcare system that we have today, and to answer your question, has grown right up with all these legislators passing laws over the last, some people have been in Congress for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? And so it becomes the system, right? The man, whatever you want to call it. And they have their own interests, right? And they do what's in their best interest, right? So the healthcare system has grown to be controlled by large government and corporate, both for-profit and not-for-profit entities, right? And they structure the system for their own interests, right? And so the way they operate, it's basic, behavioral economics, right? They create incentives that, are in their own best interest, not necessarily in the individual's interest. And then those become structural inequities. They become structurally set in place, and they become enormous incentives created by government programs that lead to waste and inefficiencies. Why? Because at one point in time, they benefited somebody, right? And arguably for political reasons, the constituents. But over time, these large organizations, both private sector and government, that control healthcare, right? They have no interest or intent or reason from basic behavioral economics to change.
Yeah, and so we don't have any hope at change for the better in that environment, right? It's only more of the same, and so I have to chuckle, to myself a little bit, because I just look at what's going on, and I think, Trump's first appointment was him being a complete fish out of water, not being a politician, not understanding how DC works. I think he went in and he took the advice of a lot of people who basically said, you can't nominate this one, you can't nominate that one. No, that's an absolute no. And I think he learned from that experience. And this time around, it just seems like he's doing whatever the fuck he wants. And but not. And again, it's not coming from me as like a flag waving, Trump guy. It's coming from a place of, I'm excited because I think the appointments that he's making I think these are folks that are going to shake things up. And I think if ever a time that we needed shaking up, now is the time, with our deficit spiraling out of control, with healthcare approaching a $5 trillion spend. My question, though, Dr. Yale, is you are somewhat of an insider. And so even with all of this radical change that's coming, if you're a betting man, do you think it actually gets done? Or do you think that they're going to run into headwinds that are too strong, even for this radical force that he's assembled?
Right. Let me quote you there. quote your question. The question is, do I think it will actually get done? And I apologize as an attorney, I'm going to parse that out. Depends on what you mean by it.
Yeah.
And it depends on what you mean by actually. And it depends on what you mean by get done. Now, that said, I have been in touch with folks who I will remain nameless at fairly high echelons in a camp that happens to be located in West Palm Beach right now. And they are moving quickly, right? And to your point, the president-elect evidently has learned from his experience, right?
Yeah.
And learned quite well, and is doing things totally differently. For example, as a president, as a student of the presidency, as I have been, because I worked in the White House and I worked in a inaugural committee and a presidential transition, and so I know how those things work. And one of the first things you do is what? You have a campaign, you have an election, one side wins, one side loses, and then what do the campaign staff do? They either have jobs or they don't have jobs, right? And they have jobs if they move into the next institution of the presidency, which is called the transition. It's actually a legal entity, right? And you sign the papers with the General Services Administration to have this office, which the last two elections was in the Hoover Building here in DC, and you move in and you get paid, right? Curious thing is that as of a couple days ago, the Trump team had not signed anything with GSA. Now, why is that? Well, it's a subtle matter, but actually it's a big matter, right? Why? Because the transition, once you sign that paper, there's all sorts of legal restrictions and constraints under which you have for what you can and can't do. And that really constrains you as to, who you bring in, who you talk to. It has to all be recorded, and what appointments you make, what decisions you make. And by having the transition in Mar-a-Lago and not moving into the building here in DC and not signing that GSA, contract, right? Lengthy contract, you have essentially said, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do this my way, and I'm going to figure this out without all these constraints. Because what do the constraints do? Like any good government laws and regulations, they restrict your ability to be innovative and think differently.
Wow.
So just a subtle example of to your point, how this is different. And is it exciting? Is it scary? The answer is yes. Right? Because it depends. As an attorney, I have to say that. I have to say that one word because it's the big word, right? It depends on your perspective and what you hope to have happen. Now, that said, back to your question, and I apologize for going so long here. Back to your question. Will there be change? Well, obviously, yes. Where will that lead us? I think that, to your point, given the structural problems we have in the healthcare system, and everybody sees them, and the entire infrastructure that's been built up to benefit from that, you get what you incentivize. And we've incentivized the system, and we can't shake it loose because it's there. But this is the best opportunity, I think, that I've seen in my lifetime to make change for the good. And that's, I think, what you and I and everybody listening to this podcast has to make sure happens, that it's for the good, because there are also constraints and guardrails. You can't go off and do something crazy because you have the courts, you have the Congress, and you have the people in the executive branch who will stand up and say, hey, that's not right.
No. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's insightful, because I, for one, and I think the average person doesn't have this insight. And I'm quite sure, based on what you just shared, that there were probably a lot of feathers ruffled in the fact that they didn't sign off on this. What did you call it? A GSA? GSA
has a document that you sign that allows you to officially be put into this new institution, the transition from 46 to 47, right? And
no, so it's, it seems to be a little bit of a chess game that's being played out, and I'm sure that there were, plenty of the DC kind of insiders that were probably waiting for this moment, because if they had signed the GSA, then that would mean that there would be certain assurances that they'd have, or they know that they would be able to constrain the new administration in some ways. And it seems that this move to not opt into that is very clever, at least from the perspective of an administration that wants to get things done and not be influenced or hamstringed by kind of the status quo.
Yeah, and to that point, if you look back at all the other transitions, they had to release the names of people who were in the transition. Why? Because they're getting paid by the government.
Right.
Right. Where's the list this time around? I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I've started my own list. Right. Okay, talk to him. You kind of see it as people start getting,
Right.
and I'm not going to name any names because they'll come out sooner or later. Obviously,
Sure.
Mayim Adas is one you've heard. Marty Makary is one. But yeah, I mean, it's moving in a very deliberative pace.
Yeah.
To move people in that will, we hope, do the right thing.
Yeah, no, and I know there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there. And folks really are scared. And I guess time will ultimately tell. But from my perspective, it's not a blue-red thing. I think if you look at it pragmatically and you see what's going on, there are certain things that absolutely need to be changed. We shouldn't have federal agencies being subsidized to the extent that they are by the pharmaceutical industry, for example. I can see no benefit to the American people for sustaining that. And yet I ask you, like, are they going to be able to pull this off because of how much money and power is at stake? And so that's always the X factor for me. It's always like, I like to think that I'm a risk taker. I'm not really a gambler because I do my homework and I take calculated risks. And when I look at this problem, I ask myself, is this going to really get done? And I don't know that I want to put any money on it, but I'm feeling pretty good about the horses that are in the race.
Yeah. So yeah, good question. Let's focus on the money that pharma gives to the FDA. And I'll have to go back to Orrin Hatch and Henry Waxman that I think back in the 80s put in place a user fee. Why is that? Because the complaints were that the FDA is too slow. We can't get things through. We can't hire the staff, yada, 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 right?
Yep.
And so one of the solutions, big government solutions, made a lot of sense back then is, well, if you pay us a user fee, we'll be able to hire more staff and get these things through. Makes sense, right? Right? Don't realize that what it would result in is people who are potentially beholden, right, to the industry and not to do or to do things that perhaps don't make sense, but make sense economically because, again, you get what you pay for, behavioral economics, right? And so you may have these FDA staff who are beholden to the industry. That's a bad word, and I apologize. It's not beholden. They become familiar, maybe comfortable, maybe understandable to people who are trying to influence them, and maybe they don't even realize it because there's a lot of subconscious stuff as well, right? And so, again, behavioral economics, I default to that. But the point is that, to answer your question, is I believe that this is a huge opportunity to make appropriate changes and to change laws that have been on the books for decades, right? That made sense back then and may not work now.
When you say user fee, what do you mean by that?
So there's a user fee that medical device and pharmaceutical companies pay to the FDA, basically as they get their devices or the drugs approved, right? And it's been in statute. And that's part of the problem. If it's statutory, it has to be changed by Congress, right?
I see.
So it'll work if you can get the right consensus, get the right group together in Congress to actually pass to change that law. Okay. And the user fee now is to the point where it's not just a one-time user fee, it's every year. I have friends in the pharmaceutical and medical device industry that complain that just this past year, their device fees, their fees to maintain their ability to market their product went up like, I don't know, I think one person said 20%. And that's a lot of money, right? When you're paying tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to the FDA.
Sure. But so is that the issue though, or is that, I'm trying to wrap my head around, and it goes back to just kind of corruption 101, right? Follow the money. So is this user fee something that is necessary? Because after all, the FDA does, there are resources required to get drugs and medical devices approved. And is that just kind of table stakes, if you will? Or are there other fees or contributions made that are not as transparent, and that's the smoking gun?
Well, I mean, to that point, if you're talking about, say, something under the table, that's technically illegal, unethical, and will put you in jail, right?
Yeah.
But perhaps it's the above the board fees that are perhaps the most insidious, because although you can say, hey, it's just a user fee, that's what we have to run on. Let's go back to before the user fees existed and say, okay, what happened then? Well, they still worked. The FDA still worked. My dad actually worked at the FDA for a while. The FDA still worked, but did it work as quickly as it could? Well, I don't know. I mean, are there other ways to incentivize the FDA to do their job? A, B, do we just need to have government give them more money and not have them, get money directly from the pharmaceutical companies? Or do you want to take it out of general taxpayer funds, or do you want to take it out of the funds of the industry that's being regulated? I mean, I could argue both ways. So I don't know which is the right way to go.
Yeah.
And I don't know that much. I don't know enough about FDA law to be able to opine on it. But right. I mean, it's when people say there are these fees that they pay and they're horrible, I'm thinking, well, what's the reason?
Right.
Why are they in there in the first place?
Yeah.
And you got to go back to the root cause and what's the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, no, and I think the devil is in the details, because if you hear that, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I think it's over 50% of the funding from the FDA is coming from Big Pharma or thereabouts. And if that is the case, does it make sense to have the very institution that's approving the drugs and the medical devices to have their cash flow dependent upon the very thing that is seeking approval? And so that just seems to me to be an incredible conflict of interest. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
I think your point is well taken. Is there a conflict of interest? Or, let's say, I have $100 and I can either put that towards some program for needy kids, right?
Yeah.
Or because, the industry's not paying for the approval of their drugs and devices, right? Do I put that money towards the FDA? So where do you put your funds? And to your point, I think over time, what's happened is, the FDA has said, hey, we don't need the money from Congress. We can go out and just raise the money from the industry. And, it seems logical. Congress would love it. They can put money towards other things, towards education, towards the kids, whatever. But to your point, does it make the industry the FDA beholden to the industry? That's the question. Yeah,
for sure. And there are other things that's going on that just kind of makes me chuckle. Like the last week, the Wall Street Journal came out. I got a notification on my iPhone. Biden administration approves weight loss drugs for GLP-1s for Medicare and Medicaid. And I just shook my head and I was like, does it raise any other eyebrows? Is anyone else paying attention to the timing of this? Like, are you getting your last licks in? Where is this coming from? And who is the benefactor of this policy decision that's being made? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, right, they've been lobbying for this for months, if not years.
Yeah,
And it gives an open pocketbook to the pharmaceutical companies to make an awful lot of money.
right.
That said, there are people who do have conditions that benefit from those medications.
Yeah,
And whether they have to pay the $20,000 a year or 20,000, whatever it is, to stay on this for life, um, I think it's a personal decision, right? That you have to decide whether this is important enough to you to take it for life with all the side effects and everything else. Now let's put that aside and say, okay, there are people who should have this medication. The question is, should we make it a blanket reimbursement decision, coverage decision it's called,
right.
where we're paying for anybody and everybody who steps up? And, whether you're, overweight like I am, which I'm not, but I could make an argument that I'm overweight. I would like to be skinnier. I'd like to be healthier, obviously.
Yeah,
And it's free or at a reduced cost. I'd go for it. Right.
right.
Is that the right thing to do? I don't know. I mean, it's one of these things where you have to weigh the benefits versus the negative elements of either the policy, the coverage policy, or the drug itself. Right. But I think it's clearly a win for certain people, the large drug company. And I think we really have to weigh that and take a look at what's the right thing to do, given everything else that needs to be done by the government.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are absolute benefits for a segment of folks to having these drugs available. Without question, I've spoken to CEOs of PBMs and, with, doctors of pharmacy backgrounds, understanding the interaction of the drugs and how it affects the body. And clearly, for type 2 diabetics and some folks that just are kind of out of options, these can be game changers for sure. The question, though, is, does it become an ethical dilemma if we're now advocating for prescribing these to 12-year-olds, to 8-year-olds, to 6-year-olds? And I think there's a lot of, how could I put this? I think we're too quick to kind of make these blanket policy decisions without fully appreciating or dialing in, let's say, the use case. I don't think it should be as simple as if you're on Medicare, if you're on Medicaid, and a doctor writes you a script, you qualify for this. It just doesn't seem to be fiscally responsible, in my view. And let's put the fiscal aside for a moment. Physiologically appropriate is the other piece, because I could be mistaken, but I think Novartis is one of the manufacturers of these drugs, and they don't even allow it to be prescribed in their home country, right? It's you have to jump through hoops before you would even qualify for this. And here it just seems to be way too easy. And I get back to, just like, my kids are grown now, they're out of the house, but the analogy that I would use is sometimes you gotta be a parent. Sometimes you have to be the one that says, no, son, you can't have it. And, there are reasons that you can't have it. And one of the reasons that you can't have it is the cupboard is bare. Like there's no money for this. And I don't think we do a good enough job at just policing this stuff. Now, that is not to say that there's not a segment of the population that legitimately could benefit that doesn't have the financial means or mechanism. And, can there be exceptions made? We could debate that all day long. But I think, with the stroke of a pen to just say, like, all Medicare and Medicaid recipients are now eligible for GLP-1s, It just seems to me to be insane when our deficit is just spiraling out of control. Where is the money coming from?
That's how the government works. I mean, they make these decisions with the stroke of a pen, and as I've always said, if you look at Congress, right, the legislation that's passed is based on hearings that happened 2 years ago that are put into a bill that are passed for political reasons, right? That may change just for the political reasons. It has nothing to do with the hearings. That then go out and regulations have to be developed, and the regulations may be obviously are different than the law itself, and so it's this whole process that structurally puts in place these great ideas for somebody that turn out to have second and third order consequences that may be horrible, right? Whether it's for financial reasons or physical reasons. My question, getting back to your point of a 12-year-old taking these obesity drugs, is why is that child obese in the first place? Right? Well, again, it may be genetics. The person may have some condition, unfortunate, but it's not just that child. It's our entire population of children that are suffering from obesity, suffering from all sorts of diseases that were rare 50, 100 years ago. And so we're getting to the point where we have a lot of people who have these chronic conditions, and it's not just all these people who are old age, it's younger people. It's, 20s and 30s, teens, right? Down to 12 years old, where they are getting in horrible shape, and we have problems with the military recruiting people because they're in such bad shape. Now, why is that? And so it's getting back to the root cause, and not to focus on the medication so much, but focus on what is the root cause for some of these issues. And I think that's one of the things that the new administration is taking to heart and would like to figure out.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I know that you were present at the Senate committee hearing that Ron Johnson brought, where RFK Jr. was sitting by his side, and there was a panel of healthcare influencers, medical doctors, and experts. And the consensus was, and folks, if you haven't had an opportunity to check it out, if healthcare is something that you're interested in, by all means, Google it. We'll get a link into our show notes. It's a 4-hour Senate committee hearing. If you're a geek like I am, it's compelling. It was phenomenal, and they talk about the correlation between our frankenfood, our ultra processed food in the U.S. Having over 10,000 approved ingredients through the FDA. Whereas our counterparts in Europe have less than 400 ingredients and additives that are approved for consumption. And I don't know, is there a correlation between that and the fact that even though we spend more on healthcare than any country in the world by far, we also, are the sickest, and our life expectancy is 5 years less than our European counterparts? I mean, can we connect the dots there? I'm pretty sure we can. And so, you being a part of that, being there, what was that like?
That was an eye-opener. It truly was. So for years, I've been involved in various health plans and various companies, startup companies, to try and create these disease management programs to truly identify those persons with chronic illnesses and get them on the right path. And, many times we were successful, many times we were unsuccessful. As a matter of fact, we were unsuccessful more times than we were successful for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into. But it's like, why are all these people getting chronic conditions? And I always thought, well, it's because we as a health system aren't doing the right thing. We got to do more. We got to put more money into disease management. And the entire session was, okay, let's get back to root cause. Let's not just say, hey, here's some treatment, right, that we have to pay for, but why is the person in this situation in the first place? And more important, compared to the 70s, 60s, 40, 50 years ago when the population wasn't like this? Why are there so many people with type 2 diabetes much larger? The incidence and prevalence is so much greater, right? That has to be some underlying cause, and it can't all be genetics because, we start looking around, and what was really revealing in that meeting was that there are other factors that come into play, such as our food. And, nutrition is an important aspect of health, obviously. And, RFK has said, treat food like medicine. I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? We kind of all knew that, and we kind of all heard that in medical school and dental school, that what garbage in, garbage out, right? And so it was a focal point when all those forces came together and emphasized not only that, but showed proof positive how people had changed with nutrition alone when the pharmaceuticals that they were taking, when over years, one lady had an autoimmune disease and she had been treated with all sorts of medications. She had joints replaced that were just totally devastated, and nothing worked. They put her on pain meds. She was addicted, and nothing worked. And so the lady was going crazy, and she said, "I got to stop this." So she dropped all the drugs. I'm going, what are you doing? And then she said, then I started just changing my diet, and totally turned her. It took years to figure this out on her own, taking the responsibility for it, not under the doctor's supervision, and turned it around to say, hey, this works for me. This is what I need to do.
Right. Amazing. And so commonsensical, right? It's you don't need to have a PhD in this stuff to just say, doesn't that just make sense? This episode of Broken Healthcare Podcast is brought to you by Benefixa Healthcare Consultants. Visit benefixa.com to learn what's possible. Reduce the cost of healthcare for your organization, deliver better outcomes for your people, and yes, design health plans that give your people a path to $0 out-of-pocket costs for healthcare. Visit benefixa.com today. Doesn't it make sense to eat organic food as opposed to food that's, sprayed with pesticides? If they're killing the bugs that land on the food, what is it doing to our gut biome? I mean, come on. We don't need like a double-blind study to figure this stuff out. It's not that hard. And so, the Means brother and sister team, Casey and Callie, that were there, amazing. And her book, Good Energy, fascinating read. And just getting back to basics. I mean, here's a young lady that essentially threw away an extraordinarily promising career as a medical doctor, ENT, Stanford trained. And she basically, when she was kind of confronted with the, diagnose and prescribe, finally she said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And at the root of it, it's really just about, hey, don't eat ultra-processed foods. Let's do that as a start. That'd be a pretty good start. And then start thinking about the trickle down for our kids and future generations, right? If you think about what's going on in kids' lunch programs, and look, I get that there's an economic side to this, right? It's much cheaper. It's much more cost-effective to serve this crap, highly processed food than it is to serve nutritious whole foods. But God, I mean, our underserved communities, the kids from the ghettos that don't have access to food, sometimes their only food and nutrition comes through their school program. Imagine the difference that it would make in their lives if now they're eating healthy, organic food as opposed to the crap that we've been poisoning them with for years and years and years. And I don't care if you're red or blue. Does that just not fucking make sense? Like, stop it. Just get to the basics, and let's take care of our kids. if the administration accomplished that one thing, and I don't know who would preside over that. It'd be interesting. How long do you think it's going to take for us to see a different food pyramid?
Huh. That's a good question. That's a very good question because, on the one hand, I agree with everything you said. That if we could have organic food, healthy food, I'm having had some in my family folks who passed away at an early age. I've become hyper conscious with what I eat, right? And I tried to instill that in my kids, who totally object to how obsessive I am with my food, but I'm obsessive with my food. So I understand that it would be great to offer, healthy food to folks, but the issue then is the cost, right?
Yeah.
And so I also understand that a lot of these foodstuffs that are out there that are you're able to make at a lot lower cost, although they're not as nutritious because they're ultra processed, right? We're able to feed a lot more people with the same amount of funds, with the same amount of material, right? And so I think in the history of the world, people have gone hungry, as they still do in food deserts, right? But by having less expensive ultra processed foods, you're able to feed more people, right? And so there's a trade-off, right? You're giving them these ultra processed foods, but they have toxins in them. Will the toxins make them obese? Will they make them, give them other diseases? So it's a hard decision to make. To your point, will the food pyramid change? Yes, it's going to change. I can predict that, right? But then you have to figure out what those trade-offs are, and how you make it equitable, how you make it healthy for everybody. And that's something that's difficult to do, because I think one of the problems that government has, whether you have the current food pyramid or a different food pyramid, is, does one size fit all?
Well,
right?
So I would argue that the food pyramid should have nothing to do on economics. Your ability to eat the prescribed food pyramid, according to the new layers of the pyramid, that's going to be more challenging on a budget, for sure. But the idea that we should create a food pyramid based on economics, I think we're missing the point. I think people should understand at a very basic fundamental level, like whole foods is the key. And I'm certainly not a nutritionist. I struggle with my own food addiction, alcohol addiction. I think I've turned a corner and I'm heading in the right direction there. But I'm a human being, and I'm kind of influenced by the same thing that everyone's influenced by that's out there. But I know now that I should strive to eat a gram of protein per day. That equates to my ideal body weight. And that's a lot of protein. I mean, if I wanted to be 180 pounds, I'm significantly heavier than that now. It's 180 grams of protein, which is a lot. But that really is the ideal. And, we could argue about, the different diets out there and all of that stuff. But on a fundamental level, I think that people need to be trained. They need to understand, hey, this is what you should consume if you want to be optimal. And if you just visit, if it's not possible due to dollars, we get it, right? But at least be armed with the facts and know that, look, if you're eating fast food every day, if you're going through the Wendy's drive-through and the McDonald's drive-through on the regular, you might want to do a little less than that. You might want to scale it back. And I really think at the end of the day, Dr. Yale, it's really just a matter of, we can't expect to turn, the ship like on a dime. That's not going to happen. But if we can get folks to just do incremental change and just maybe stop behaving badly 7 days a week, and maybe if we could scale it back to, 4 or 5 days a week as a start, and then baby steps towards, kind of optimal. But that's the other, point. I just did a whole blood panel, and one of the guys that was in that meeting was Breckham Bueller, and he runs a company called Ways to Well, and I just did a whole blood panel and looked at biomarkers. And if you look at what a traditional physician would look at my bloods, I was in the normal range just about everywhere. But what I was not was in the optimal range. And optimal is what we want. And so I think we need to kind of change the narrative and do a reset and a baseline. And that's some of the stuff that I'm excited about for what's to come. Here's a question for you, though. Getting back to the FDA and the Medicare and Medicaid. When you were running Tricare, was it your role to make decisions with approving like a GLP-1? Was that in your purview? And if so, what was your calculus? How would you approach this if you were heading Tricare today? And tell us a little bit about how you got involved in that.
Yeah, so that's called a coverage decision. And as it turns out, in my role as head of the Tricare Health Plan, I was responsible for making coverage decisions for the entire military health system on what drugs and devices we would pay for, right? For our entire 9.6 million beneficiary population. The calculus is basically it's an evidence pyramid, and it's takes a look at what the evidence shows. The randomized controlled trials are at the top of that pyramid, and then there's other evidence that you look at, right, to figure out, is this something that obviously safe and effective, because the FDA would have had to approve it. Then we also look at what other people do, specifically Medicare and VA. Medicaid may or may not cover it, so we take that into consideration. VA may or may not cover it, but we realize that our population, as the active duty service members, their family, retirees, are a different population in that they're generally more healthy, and they're not the over 65 population, because you can retire when you're 45 or 55, right? In the military. So we take a look at what the Medicare has done, Medicaid, but we don't take that and rubber stamp. No, we take a look at the impact and the effect on our particular specific population, right? And then we make a judgment call. We figure out, okay, what do we have currently in our formulary that already works, right? And is this something net new? Is this something that's going to benefit our population? Is this something our population needs, right? And then if there's sufficient evidence, then by statute, we need to approve coverage, right? But we can put constraints on it. The obvious constraints are, if you have certain conditions, or if you've already tried certain treatments, or if you've had certain therapies over time, they haven't worked, maybe this, particular drug or device should be made available, and then we'll pay for it. Right. And, it's only after that we have to figure out, okay, how much is it going to cost? Is it going to be a budget buster? Some of the treatments that they have now for a lot of conditions that really are genetic based, they are huge cost items, right? That we have to cover. But, when you get to the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, $1 million cost for some of these medications, it's huge, and you have to cover them.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I interviewed the CEO of USRxCare, Renzo Lozati, and he shared a story about a drug called Strensiq. And Strensiq is a $2 million drug. And they reviewed a plan that had, I believe, 2 people that were on Strensiq. And part of what, doesn't take place in a traditional health plan, if you're, the majority of Americans are getting their healthcare coverage through their employer, privately funded insurance. And what often doesn't happen is, that a patient is put through the kind of clinical paces that they really scrutinize. Is this drug appropriate for, this patient? And apparently there was a genetic marker test that would indicate whether someone was a candidate and can be helped by Strinziq. Now, this is a $2 million drug. 2 out of 2 cases, they didn't do the required genetic testing. and so they rightfully took the patient off of those drugs. But that's the kind of shit that's going on out there, which is crazy. And I could imagine that as the CEO of Tricare, it's an enormous amount of responsibility because you're charged with the health and welfare of over 9 million active military and their dependents. And so I'm sure that's not something that you took lightly. But I'm going to switch gears again and ask you, how did you get selected for that role? And did you have any inkling as to what you were stepping into? And I'll tell you why I ask. With some of the appointments that's going on now, we're talking about massive organization with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of employees, and the whole question around, what kind of experience, does he have? And I chuckle at that because how many opportunities do you have where you could be super bright, educated at the best schools, you can have, done many, many things in your career, but not led an organization with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or more employees. Is there anything that can prepare you for that?
For Tricare itself, or for an organization like Tricare?
Well, tell me about your experience first. How did you get into that role? Is that a very political thing, or?
No, actually, the Tricare role is a career senior executive service position, right? And so it's not a political position. It's not one of the positions that's appointed by the president or I should say, or confirmed by the Senate, right? And it's a role that I had neither aspired to nor even thought of, right? And so I came up as, I had a startup and another startup, serial entrepreneur, sold those companies, 2 more startups, and then I found myself at United as an executive running their innovation incubator. Then went to Aetna, started their accountable care organization group, and went out to Silicon Valley to start up their innovation incubator for Aetna.
Dr. Yale is a severe underachiever, folks. So DDS, right? Doctor of dental surgery.
Yes, sir.
Attorney. So, double threat there. And then he goes out into the world and just no grass has grown under this man's feet. So. And look at him. You look pretty damn good for doing all that stuff.
Thank you.
So
I think life's been very good to me. God's been good to me. I'm very blessed. So, so then got the opportunity to be chief clinical officer of the largest dental plan in the world. And when I didn't become CEO of that organization, the right person did.
That was Delta Dental, right?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Yeah.
And the right person got to be CEO, excuse me. And I was given an attractive package, and I left. And that was 2019. And I get a call from the DoD. They said, "Hey, we found you. We found you through some Silicon Valley contacts that you've developed the innovation incubator at Aetna, and we think you could help us here at Tricare to instill these innovations that we've been looking at, because we're about to award a new $18 billion a year contract, and we'd like to change how we've been doing business." Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I came aboard March 13th, 2020, a date you might remember.
I was diagnosed with COVID in that month.
Yes, sir. And I was supposed to stay 3 to 6 months and bring all my expertise from having 2 decades of innovating in the healthcare field and help Tricare write a new contract to instill innovation that they felt would be beneficial. And so that was COVID, and COVID came around, and that 3 to 6 months turned into a year. the new administration came aboard, and Biden administration in 2021, and they said, "Hey, you seem to have done a good job helping us. Would you like to be the head of Tricare?" And I said, "Well, would this be permanent?" And I said, "No, you'd be an interim until we found, the real head of Tricare." So I said, "Sure, why not? 3 to 6 months." 3 years later,
it never works out that way, doctor.
So that was my story, and it was more by accident than by design.
Wow, that's crazy. And so the plan was originally to get out 3 to 6 months, and you ended up being there for years. Was it truly like a baptism by fire experience? Because I don't think you had, even though you had done some very impressive things, you never had run an organization at that scale and scope before. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So it was new in some ways. It was old and familiar in other ways, right? Having been in senior levels at United Healthcare, Aetna, and at Delta, we had 35 million beneficiaries at Delta. And here at Tricare, it's only 9.6 million beneficiaries. So it was smaller. Aetna was 60 billion when I joined. When I left, it was 75 billion. We had quite a massive amount of growth. Tricare was only 18 billion, right? So from a comparative standpoint, it felt very familiar, very comfortable.
Yeah.
What was new and different, right, was the regulations and requirements that the private sector has to deal with. They're compounded when you're a government official or a government employee. And so, we had very complex rules that we had to live with. We had to, make sure every T was crossed, every I was dotted. And it's interesting because, we talk about how government is this big, massive monolith, and there's the government and the private sector, and they're factions. Within the government, there are factions. I had situations where CMS did something which we didn't like, and I led the group that was required to fight something that CMS was doing. So it was very interesting and different area to be in. And we have our colleagues at the Veterans Administration call over and say, "How do you do this?" and learn from us. And we call over there and say, "How do you do this?" And, then we'd interface with the industry on industry days because, we couldn't officially have them soliciting us. And it was a very formal, structured process, which I think is the good thing about government, in that it truly is built around trying to do good. And I think there's a lot of very good people in specifically Tricare and in the military health system and in the Defense Health Agency, because from my personal perspective, national security is one of the most important and the key roles of national federal government, right? And everybody there has a mission, and they know what the mission is, and they're all on board, right? So it's one of the most mission-driven organizations I've ever been in, and it's very inspiring.
Yeah, for sure. That's wild. To me, it's just it's crazy to think about the scale of that. Who did you report to as CEO of Tricare?
Yeah, I reported to middle management. Right, there's currently it's called the Assistant Director Healthcare Administration, right, and then that reports to the Director of the Defense Health Agency, who's now Lieutenant General Talita Crossland, right? And then she reports up to a political appointee, who's the Assistant Secretary of Defense Health Affairs, who then reports up to the Secretary of Defense.
Wow. And was it difficult getting things done there? Was it very stressful doing what you were doing, or did you just kind of fall into a routine and you felt like you were surrounded by good people and it was, for the most part, just the day at the office?
I was surrounded by some phenomenal, great people, right?
Yeah.
I think it was one of the most inspiring jobs I've ever had in my life, right? And it was always a stressful role.
Yeah.
And a lot of it depends on how resilient you are to stress, because there'd be something new every day.
Yeah.
And when I left in June of this year, somebody asked me, "Hey, how is it being out from under that?" I said, "Well, it's nice not to have 18 billion problems to worry about over the weekend."
Right.
Referring to the
imagine.
$18 billion, right? Because something would always happen over the weekend. And you were on, the military is on 24 hours a day, 7
Right.
days a week, 365 days a year, right?
Right.
And so, those folks, because half of our staff were military, half were civilian. I think every single one of the civilians was former military, right? And so, and things would happen as in any health plan. We have a situation where a child was born with a genetic defect that needed $1 million treatment to live.
Oh.
And that came in Friday afternoon. And the decision had to be made by the director of the DHA before the weekend, because the operation had to take place, either an operation or the treatment had to take place Monday or Tuesday, or the person was dead. Right. And so, those are the kinds of life or death decisions and situations that you face every day. Somebody, helicopter crashes on a Pacific island, and a kid is, air medevaced out, and then has to come stateside. And, it's like, you're on it, and making sure that person, and luckily that person survived severe burns, but what a hero he was for making it through, and in months, years of recuperation. Actually, it was months. I saw him just this past summer, and very inspiring individual who is still in the military. So those are the kinds of things that happen, and that you have to be available to support in any way you can.
How the hell do you do the calculus on that? Like, my position is, there's no amount of money that we shouldn't pay for these dedicated men and women that really are giving their lives to the nation. But I guess there is a dollar sign to consider at the end of it. How the hell do you do it? How do you decide? She gets the $1 million surgery, or no, we can't. Do you have to take into account the math and the potential outcome? Does that weigh into it, or is it just a case by case basis? Is it done by committee? Do you make the decision? Like, how does it happen?
Yeah, in life and death situations, those decisions are rather easy because we do it.
You do it,
right? And so there isn't a calculation. Well, are we going to spend this $1 million? I was, the first time I had to sign off on $1 million treatment, I was stunned. I was just stunned.
Yeah.
I was happy to do it because it was life-saving, but I was stunned that that's what we do.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what you might be thinking of are those situations where somebody, went to the wrong provider, and didn't follow the rules and was out of network provider. And then, we're not going to pay for it because that's what the law says.
Right.
Right. And so, there's the reason I see that situation, because I saw all the worst cases, right? Mm-hmm. Where, and I'll just put one out there because it's a, may seem very simple situation, because under the rules, if you're active duty service member, you are required to seek your care at the military treatment facility, the military hospital, or to a network provider. If you don't, then you are responsible for paying the entire cost of that care. Right. So what happens? Well, clearly,
right.
Stuff happens.
Yeah.
And a person looked on the provider directory, and we know how accurate those are.
Right.
Found a Tricare network provider.
Yeah. For
this person's significant other.
Yeah.
And sent that person to the facility, was treated, and gets a bill in the mail a few months later. You owe the entire freight for this care.
Oh,
now,
God.
Can you imagine?
No. No, I can't. And that's why we have over 100 million Americans with medical debt, which is
Medical
a
debt.
staggering
Medical debt. Yeah.
staggering number.
Right. Yeah. And so is this surprise billing? Is this something wrong? That's why I saw that letter. We I'll ask you in a minute to guess how many inquiries, letters, complaints we got per year from 9.6 million beneficiaries, but we'll save that for later. So I see this letter come up to me and from staff, and it's very simple. It's like, you didn't go to a network provider. It's your fault. It's your problem.
Right.
But then, so I always read the incoming letters because it's just amazing what people write. They are so articulate. They are so smart. They put out their case. They put it down. I want to know what these people are thinking, doing, knowing, feeling. Right.
Yeah.
And so I read this letter, and this person details exactly how they went to the provider directory, what they saw, how they chose it, that they always do this for their significant other to make sure they're in network. They know the rules. Very bright person. I'm thinking, wait a minute, this isn't adding up. They did everything right.
Mm-hmm.
They did everything right. And why is it this conclusion? So I sent it back to staff. I said,
how lucky are they that they had you that was thoughtful enough to get involved and read the trail? How many CEOs would be like, that's below my pay grade? Like, really? I don't know if you credit yourself with that or not, but come on, that's huge.
I just felt my job was to make sure people got what they needed and deserved. May not be what they want, but they need to get what this is a benefit, right?
That's awesome.
And so I said, I need more information. So they sent me the entire file. I read through the file. I'm going, wait a minute. It still doesn't make sense. Yes, I can see where the provider was not a network provider, but where was the mistake? Where was the miscommunication? Why does this person say they looked at the directory, they saw the person's name? Because I know how accurate directories are. They're totally inaccurate, right? And so I said, I need more information. So they got the screen grabs from the Windows 3.1 from the health plan where they looked it up. And as it turns out, there were 3 doctors in this practice, right? 2 were Tricare, right? Network providers. The third one had just come in and had applied to be a Tricare, but wasn't a network provider until the week after.
Technicality.
So what do you do? Sent it back to staff. I said, look, it's clear to me what you do. Rewrite the letter. They came back. They said, no, here's the statute. Here's the regulation. Here's why we can't do it. This is what you have to do.
Right.
And I said, look, you're asking me to sign a letter and tell me that this person is lying, that they didn't do everything right. I'm not going to sign the letter.
Right.
And so after this went on for months.
Wow.
And after, so they found some minuscule allowance that allowed me a one-time exception for this one person to do this, to pay for it. And we got it done. Yeah.
That's crazy. What kind of a bill were we talking about? Hundreds of thousands?
I can't disclose because it might give away confidence.
No worries.
It was not hundreds of thousands of dollars, put it that way.
But it's a large sum of money, and really, it's irrelevant. The point
our
is,
beneficiaries are not just generals or sergeants or lieutenants or corporal. They are, they are folks who are poverty level in some cases.
Sure.
Right. So any amount of money is important, and our enlisted men who do the work.
Yeah.
On the ground.
Yeah.
Every day, right? Ordinary people doing extraordinary things that we owe so much to, right? That any amount of money, it would not be enough to compensate them. That's why they need to get what they deserve.
They're lucky that they had you on their watch, really, because that could have turned out quite differently. And I'm sure that there are many cases where it didn't work out as it should have in this situation. But luckily, this was something that you put eyes on, and you weren't going to stand for it. And that's one of the attributes, I think, of great leadership. It's, being able to face the fire and look at the facts and say, no, we're not signing off on this. That takes character, it takes integrity, and I applaud you for that. So you were going to have me guess at something. How many?
How many inquiries do we get? And the reason I know this is that after I found my replacement, I said, hey, I'm just curious. Last year, which was 2023,
right?
How many inquiries did we have? From beneficiaries, from Congress, from the press, from anybody that we had to respond to as Tricare, the Tricare health plan. I was just curious. And then how many did I personally sign off on? Because I would be doing 10, 20 of these a day. And it's like,
right.
Take them over the weekend, review this stuff. And so I was just curious.
Right. Well, you're talking to a guy that probably has 1 million unread messages in my inbox. Because I am not the guy, like my wife will go in and she'll delete. There's no one's got time for that. And so I get an inordinate amount of email. So it's got to be in the millions.
Well, not a million, not in the millions, but these are actual inquiries that we had to respond to, whether it's from Congress, whether it's from, email inquiry from beneficiaries. I'm not talking about press inquiries, and I should put that off the table, but from beneficiaries who needed something, who had a problem, who were seeking our advice. Yeah. Customer service calls, not the ones that our managed care support contractors have, but our staff alone. When we were only 350 staff, by the way, in the DoD, because all of the claims processing and all of the administrative services, we have managed care support contractors that do our ASO work, right? Yeah. Currently Humana and HealthNet, and then next year it's going to be TriWest to take over for HealthNet. But our staff alone, how many inquiries did we have to respond to?
Yeah, I mean,
325 people.
325 people. It's got to be north of 5,000.
It is.
Yeah.
Much more.
But that's
Guess
crazy.
Guess again.
25,000.
More than that.
Am I getting warm?
You're still pretty cold.
125,000.
More than that.
250,000.
We had 360,000 inquiries last year. Now, 250,000 of those were handled by the branch of Tricare that takes care of people who are transitioning in and out of the service, and they have to get their medical reviewed, disability reviewed, those kinds of things before they actually retire or are discharged.
But when you put it into perspective, with 300 odd staff, it's like 1,000 a day per staff.
Yes,
that's crazy.
Yes. It is crazy. It is crazy. And so, but to even take out the 250,000, and there's still 120,000 that we have to respond to every single year. And of those, I saw 4,000 myself last year and had to sign off, make a decision, read the incoming. I was actually shocked because I know I had gotten into the pace and cadence. And then when my successor came in, he came up to me one day and said, "How did you keep up with all this stuff?" Right. I said, "I don't know, but you just do it, because if you don't, the spigot doesn't turn off."
You've done a lot in your career, and so now you're consulting primarily. What type of work are you doing? You're at an in-between stage. What's going on with you now, Dr. Yale?
Yeah. So as soon as I left, I got a dozen calls of people who wanted to hire me for this, that, and the other thing, and I have not found exactly what I want to do, though I am still in discussions with some organizations. But 4 came back and wanted me to be a consultant. So I'm consulting in 4 companies. I'm on a board of another company, and the main work I do is getting contracts in the DoD for organizations. And as a matter of fact, yesterday I just learned that I got a contract awarded to another company. Shortly after I got out, got a contract for another one. And my post-employment restrictions are that any client I get, I have to run it by our ethics officer. And so my ethics officer is my closest friend because I have to run by everybody who says, I want you to be a consultant. Before I sign a contract, I have to make sure there aren't any post-employment restrictions that I have. And so I'm doing some consulting and looking for my next gig.
Wow, that's so enlighten me. How does someone hire you as a consultant? Because I would imagine it's not as simple as putting an application in, right? They're hiring you for your expertise, and you are assisting and consulting them in navigating the system. Am I correct in saying that, or
Yes, correct.
Okay. So there's a process, and clearly a tremendous amount of value that someone with your background and acumen bring to the party. That's very, very cool stuff, man. It's thank you so much for just kind of giving us a glimpse into what happens behind the curtain. Because it's fascinating to a layman like me that's not involved in politics, that's not involved in government or any of the services. It really is enlightening as to how it all works and comes together. I want to ask you this as kind of in closing. You've worked as a practicing dentist. You shared so much of what you do. What's been the most gratifying?
The most gratifying, I think the most gratifying personally for me has been running the Tricare health plan and helping people get what they need and get what they deserve. That's been the absolute most gratifying for me. And I think second to that is being able to work at a variety of organizations in the healthcare system, trying to innovate, trying to find ways to improve our health system and just, make it better and help people.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you're doing a great job. You've got a career that clearly demonstrates that your input benefited people intimately in ways that it could have turned out quite different if you weren't involved. So thank you for your service and certainly to all of the men and women that served and continue to serve our great.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Of course, it's been an absolute honor. Where do folks find you if they want to get in touch? And just lastly, I'm not going to let you go just yet. Is anyone tapping you for any roles in the new administration?
I cannot disclose.
That's a yes, ladies and gentlemen.
I cannot disclose the answer to that. Although I can admit that I have been in touch with both friends and new people that I didn't know before.
Wow. Awesome. And so if folks want to get a hold of you, what's the best way? LinkedIn or do you?
LinkedIn. Just go to LinkedIn and that's probably the best way.
Dynamite. Well, hey, let's leave it there. We did almost an hour and a half together. It was. I hope you were. The audience was as interested as I was, because I found what you shared fascinating. So until next time, folks. Peace and love always. Peace and love always. Thank you for joining. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, that's a wrap. Hit like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.